I have to click the thing. Okay.
Okay. Hello and welcome to our September book club. Today we have with us Ellery Hodges because we're discussing his book, The Never Hero. So thank you for joining us, Todd.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So as many of you might know, I'm from Tallinn, Estonia, but what part of the world are you from?
I am in Washington State in the United States, the West Coast of the United States. If anyone wouldn't know where that is. Okay.
It's great that we were able to find a suitable time for both of us to have this little chat. So I always like to ask people what kind of readers they are and how they learn to read and what they remember about their childhood. So do you remember your first experience as a reader?
I don't remember like the first kindergarten book that like was just like The Bird Flies North or whatever, but I remember the first book, like real book that I picked up and liked, which was The Hobbit. Pretty obvious, that one. The funny thing though is that I remember I got really into the Hobbit and I read it. And I was still too young. I didn't realize I was too young for the Lord of the Rings yet, though, because it's like a very different like difficulty level as far as reading comprehension goes to jump from, because the Hobbit was written for kids and I didn't realize that when I got it. So the next thing I did was try to read the Lord of the Rings, and I got like maybe 100 words or 100 pages in, and I was like, I'm lost, like I wasn't old enough yet.
Okay, so do you remember how old you were when you tried to read?
No, I don't remember like my exact age. I remember where I was and what I was doing. I was visiting my grandma's cabin for the summer, and I didn't have any friends up there, so she took me to a bookstore, and I needed something to read, and the bookstore owner offered The Hobbit to me. I took it. Didn't think I was going to be that into it at first, because when you're that young, reading about a short guy doesn't necessarily sound that cool. But then I blew through it in less than a week, which was fast, but for me then, because I've never been a fast reader, and I certainly wasn't then. But yeah, we ended up back at that bookstore looking for the Lord of the Rings. Well, the actual Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Rings, the next week, and then I couldn't finish it. So like,
it happens because certain books actually need to. They require different ages. When we might read them when we're young and we don't understand anything, and then we'll like find new things. And even as I'm reading The Never Hero, my first time reading it, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't remember much because I've read so much in between. But I do believe that I discover new things that I didn't notice before. So what draws you to read and write stories, actually? Because in nowadays culture, we have all other kinds of entertainment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's funny you say it that way, because I often do kind of wonder, it's like, man, am I going to be able to make a living doing this 10 years from now? Because like, I'm sure I don't need to explain that comment. Anyway, but what draws me to it? I've always enjoyed writing. I never thought it was a safe way to make a living when I was in high school or college. Like, it was a real Kindle, like, and self-publishing didn't exist yet. And nothing would shut me down faster than like having to send out manuscripts to publishers and getting rejections or not getting any answer at all. Like I don't navigate bureaucracies that require that kind of paperwork very well. So for me, being able to just, when I found out about Kindle and self-publishing and just being able to like write a book and put it out, I was in a place where I was just so done with working for corporations that it was worth giving it a shot, because I'd always been good at writing and I always liked writing, but I'd never actually sat down to write a novel because I just didn't think it would ever be a safe way to like keep my family supported. Once I became aware of the Kindle solution or option, I just really poured myself into it, and I kept working the whole time. I didn't quit. It was kind of funny. Like how it worked out is I was working really hard on the book while having a job, and then the book started to do really well right as I got a new job. Like that's when it took off, and so I ended up staying at that job for another year because it's just kind of a thing. You don't get a new job like and then leave right away. Like it's just it doesn't. If I ever wanted to get another job again, I didn't have to say I did that on my resume. But the book was doing really well, and then I had to spend a year at the new job just before I could put in my resignation because I was losing money by at that point because I needed to work on the sequel. And I was spending 8 hours at work every day, and I couldn't do it there, of course. So like it was actually getting to the point where even though I'd gotten this better job, I was still losing money for being there. Anyway, so that's that. That's how that worked out. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
Okay. So I think you'll definitely be able to make a living when you sell the movie rights. It would
I would love
make
that.
such a good TV show. But I do believe that we'll always have readers because I think it's something that's very human about us, and even at the age of Kindle, we just use a different device, but we still love stories. So it's been that way like forever.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was being slightly facetious, might not be the right word, or I was exaggerating. Because like I don't think things like audiobooks are gonna go away because those are just I know that when I was commuting to work, I was always listening to audiobooks, and everyone has to commute. Most people have to commute to work back and forth. Well, that's changing too, though. So, anyhow, rambling. So.
But you already told me a little about your process and about the first book. But when do you really start writing? It was your first novel, but did you start with short stories or something like that?
I took a few creative writing classes in high school and college, so I had written, but they were assignments. So I had done them, but nothing as It's funny how much your vocabulary fails you when you're speaking as opposed to writing. It was nothing so as complicated as a full-length novel, though, right? Like I wrote a short story about a coming-of-age kid in high school when I was in high school, but it didn't have any of the complexity of the narrative of like a science fiction novel where you have to, especially like a time-traveling science fiction novel where you have to keep track of, exactly what somebody knows about the future or doesn't know about the future, or and so on and so forth, which gets, I don't know if you've read the sequels, but that gets really more and more complicated for Jonathan as he goes. Anyhow, but I remember like the first time I actually tried to write a book, I literally was told to go. It's kind of funny that these all involve my grandparents. I was being babysat by my other grandparent on my dad's side, and I didn't know what I was going to do over at their house for a long time. So I took the typewriter with me and decided I was going to write a book. Again, I had no idea how old I was, and I probably wrote half a page, but I just remember doing that back then.
Okay. I remember when I was interviewing Sean Inman, and I asked him basically the same question, and he told me a story about his school times when he wrote a story, and I might be mistaken about the time. Actually, maybe it was after he had finished school, but somebody told him that don't quit your day job, So did you have anyone to support you on your road to become a writer?
Yeah, I always, the first one's definitely my wife. If she hadn't been willing to tolerate me coming home from work, then disappearing for another 3 hours, to the point where maybe we saw each other for a half hour a day at some days, or I always mention a group of people like Nathan Van Coops has always been really supportive. Lucy Score, which and a friend of mine named Alan Jenny. These are three other writers that I talk to kind of all day sometimes. We have a chat, but they're always around and always there to like help if I'm like, I don't know if this scene works, guys. Do you think the scene works? And then they'll kind of give feedback. Or, if we're talking about how we're trying to market something. Anyhow. But yeah, those are the four people. So I'd probably give a shout out to it's being the most supportive.
Okay, good. Now you got to do that, and I'm sure they appreciate it. So I have a few questions that my son came up with. He really likes to be involved in my interviews. So he has a question. When you were a child, who was your favorite literary hero?
Does comic books count as literary?
Yeah, I think so, because they're still written words.
I over-related to Spider-Man, like the character of Peter Parker, as a child. It's probably very evident in my writing, actually, because if you
It is.
is yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Did you
say like
anything?
Well, it's just I kind of like to write those characters who always mean well, but no matter what they seem to do, it goes wrong for them. Like I was just trying to save the world. I didn't mean to be late for the date, Mary Jane. He doesn't actually say those things to her because it's like, but it's the same kind of scenario in the books. Like he can't explain why he's behaving erratically, and
Okay, so the next one. Who is your favorite character among the ones you've created?
Oh, Hayden and Colin, probably. They're the most fun for me to write because they're the most relatable to me. It's funny because like sometimes people talk about, I've read reviews of the book and they're like, these two talking just don't sound like people talking. And I'm like, they sound like every college conversation like I've ever been like near. If you ever like were at the University of Washington at that same period of time, because that's where I went to school, so that's why I placed it there. Is like, yeah, trust me, those two are not like strange, like if you they have eccentricities about the whole comic book side of things, but like their conversations are very common, really. Anyway.
They're definitely like very interesting side characters that we get their viewpoint and things like that. So I'm glad you put some work into them also. Okay, if you could be any book character in real life, who would you be?
Okay, I struggle with that question because it's like, what are you really asking me, like if I could pick any set of superpowers, which one would be my favorite? Or are you asking me like, is that the question?
Okay, well, he posed the question, so any book character.
When I think of book characters that I like to be, the only one that kind of came to mind was Matt from not the Lord of the Rings, from the Wheel of Time series. And the reason I came to that conclusion was, now again, you don't watch the TV show, but if you've read the books, he doesn't have a tragic backstory and he has a cool set of powers.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be horrible to be him. He's also pretty funny. So he's got a good sense of humor. He has an interesting power set, and he doesn't have like a whole dead family that is driving him to be a good person. Like he doesn't have anyone fridged, as they say. That's the trope name. You've heard that term before, the person in the fridge that's driving them for their revenge or whatever. So Matt, yeah.
Okay, it's interesting you mentioned the tragic backstory, because you basically started off your book from the first chapter with the tragic backstory of Jonathan. So was it, and I really liked it because it made me relate to him instantly. And it's something that we don't usually see in comic heroes. It's almost always action and action and action. And your book is more like like a psychological story or a development story and growing up story. So, but yes, we'll come back to Jonathan.
Well, remember the question you asked me is which one would I want to be? And so like who I would relate to is not necessarily who I want to be, you know, like, because I was just thinking like who would it actually like not be miserable to be? And like it would be miserable to be Jonathan, like especially for the years that these books take place, you know. So like I wouldn't want to be him, you know, in that context. But I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. And the last one from my son is, who is your favorite author? And I would like to add, what are your favorite genres to read?
My favorite author right now is Patrick Rothfuss.
Yes.
Yeah. He's just, it's so humbling whenever I read his books, because like the world he's created is so real. And like if you ever really dive into it, like even you can go online and watch YouTube videos and see how much you missed, you know, what, like, because I've read them, both of his books. He has a few more than 2 books, but his main series, I've read them 3 or 4 times, and I still don't catch all this stuff, you know, like it's amazing. And it's very humbling, especially since I'm currently writing a fantasy book. Like that's the next series that I'm working on. It takes place in a fantasy setting. But as far as what I actually read, the funny thing is I don't read very much sci-fi. I watch a lot of sci-fi. But mostly I read, if I want to just read a story for fun, like we're talking nonfiction, we're not talking about nonfiction, then I'm probably going to read like a Dresden book or some kind of urban fantasy, you know, something like that. I don't go much in for like espionage or anything like that, or anything too real life, or anything too, I mean, I want there to be some type of fantasy or science fiction elements to most of the stuff I read. I don't want something that, you know, theoretically could be possible. That makes sense. Yeah,
definitely. Yes, I don't like realism in literature also, because I've always said that I can go out on the street and watch what is happening in real life or turn on the TV, because especially nowadays when things are kind of crazy, then a good book should be like an escape, you know, from the real life. So
I should probably. Oh,
no,
sorry.
go ahead.
Well, I do have a secondary set of types of books that I gravitate towards, but I'm drawing a blank on the author's name, and I shouldn't be. But like Chuck Palahniuk and I can look it up at the internet. It's amazing. I don't know how this name is escaping me. Oh, Kurt Vonnegut, those types of writers. I often kind of fall down a hole of reading that sort of stuff as well. It's just because they're funny and great observers of, you know, the modern. Anyhow, I didn't want to forget those things, so that's all I was saying.
Okay, so we already spoke a little about Another Hero, but just let's dive into it a bit more. So what's the inspiration behind the story? Because like with the superhero stories, one of the main points is that everybody knows them, everybody gives them praise, everybody calls them for help, but there's Jonathan that nobody knows of, and he gets 0 credit and 0 praise for all his sacrifices. So where that storyline came from?
I was literally, I used to run on the treadmill a lot, and I never listen to music that has lyrics when I'm on the treadmill, because it'll kind of pull your mind into a different story. Whereas if you listen to thematic music, you kind of create a story in your head better. Does that make sense? I know this is kind of sounding like I'm going on a huge tangent, but we'll get back. So one day, I don't know why, I was running on the treadmill. It was probably 10, 12 years ago. I started to ponder the concept of like, okay, there's no such thing as a human being who doesn't have a selfish, doesn't have, who isn't doing, there's no such thing as an action that is selfless, right? And philosophically, you can kind of see how, like, even if you're doing something that feels completely selfless, you're at least being rewarded by knowing you did something selfless. You feel good about yourself. So there's no such thing as a selfless action. So I started to think about that, and I started to think about what would be the closest version I could get to Superman that actually is selfless. And again, you can't really get there. It's impossible. Like, even in the end, Jonathan is saving the world, even if no one ever knows it. So like, it's not entirely selfless, but he's never going to, he's never going to be doing it so that someone will say you did it, or, you know, or thank him. And I thought that was the closest I was ever going to be able to get to a hero who wasn't doing it for any type of recognition, because he couldn't possibly be doing it for any type of recognition. He was just doing it because it was the right thing to do. That answer the question? Or...
Yeah, it's basically when I was thinking about this question, I was also thinking about like the heroes nowadays, you know, the ones who do a good deed and then post it on Facebook.
Yeah,
so it's kind of like a totally contrary thing from your story. So the real hero is actually the one who doesn't get any credit. You know.
Have you read the sequels? I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't.
Then I will not say what I was about to say.
Don't.
Yeah.
I do believe we might also have people in the book club that haven't read them yet. So no spoilers.
Okay.
So, okay, you have a quite interesting story going on with Hayden and Colin, who are like creating a comic book about the superhero Jesus. And how did I put together this question? Let me see. So, okay, so there was a big danger to actually anger the readers. So why this kind of storyline, and where did it come from?
Okay, like there's a couple hundred answers to that question. When the first one that I think of is that the story of the comic book is intended to be sort of foreshadowing and sort of a reflection for Jonathan. Like he's you'll notice that when he sees these scenes in the book of his roommates working on these, that they're either about to influence his thinking, or it may not like be called out in the book that these things influence his thinking, but by the end it should all connect for the reader. Anyhow, if you're going to write a story that, let me back up a little so this makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of things in the book that are like cultural references that aren't going to age well. So 20 years from now, the chances of someone knowing who, you know, like of a kid really knowing who Rocky is, or any of the movies that get referenced, you know, or especially when they're talking about bad movies, like those are probably going to be under the rug of history. You know, like someone like me will still be able to read the book and understand what the writer would, what I myself was talking about, but a lot of people won't. Jesus, if you're gonna compare, is a really good bet that everyone knows that guy for a real long time to come. You know, like it's never going to be a reference that anyone doesn't get. But the other part of it is to say, like, I want to make sure that people understand that whenever I say whatever the book is trying to tell you, is there's no story that's off limits. You know, it's not, and because every story is a story, you know, like it's trying to like say like these hero stories always go a certain way. And if you really look at the Bible and the story of Jesus, it's a hero story in its own way. Like it follows the same kind of arc as all these stories that we write about. And by the end of the book, that should make, or the end of the series at least, that should definitely make sense. I hope that answers the question. it's one of those things like I feel like I probably ramble on for hours, but if I if I don't cut myself off on that topic. But
No, no, you definitely
Mm.
gave an answer that like shines a light on the topic. Okay, we've only got about 8 minutes left, so I have to choose and not ask you everything I wanted to. But okay, I really like the way you wrote, for example, the scene where Jonathan goes to the gym for the first time, and it was very relatable, I think, to many readers. So how much of your personal experience did you incorporate in the book?
I worked at a gym for a year after college. And it's funny actually, because the one character in all the series and this isn't a secret, that isn't based on an actual person is Lincoln. So like I literally just tried. I actually would call Lincoln and be like, "How would you answer if this guy said this to you?" And he would be like, "Well, probably like this." And then I'd maybe jazz it up a little bit, but Lincoln is almost he's based on a real person that I met at the gym in real life. There was a couple of his jokes that I'd always found really funny while I worked there, and I kind of tried to incorporate them into the book, but it was one of those things where like, nope, this is definitely a situation where you had to be there. So like it didn't work in that aspect. But yeah, so the gym was very easy to write because yeah, I sold gym memberships for a year. That answer the question? Like,
Yes, it did. So basically, quite a lot from at least from that point of view. And one last about the book. So you have Ferrex that Jonathan fights, but you also have a very realistic villain, Grant. So he's someone that you would actually meet in a real life and you wouldn't enjoy it. So how did you come up with his character?
he's really, if you look at Grant, he's just every bad thought a guy might have, except for most men would be like, no, that's a stupid thought, or no, that's an evil thought, or he just kind of runs with it and assumes that he's right. So like most of his thoughts, like I don't think, again, like it's you have to be careful when you talk about villains. Like I always wonder how Stephen King kind of gets away with this, because he writes some messed up guys. It was like, you have to have had those thoughts to write that character, though. It's like, yeah, but I knew that they were stupid and horrible and bad. Like you can't help what crosses your mind, but you can react to it. Like I always love that. I think it's from a movie called Empire Records. It's one of my favorite lines in the movie. Is like, who knows where thoughts come from? They just appear. It's like like it's kind of true. Like I don't really have, like, you get in a train of thought. No, sorry, you know what? I'm getting on a huge tangent here talking about thinking, and like, but basically that's what Grant is. He's every bad instinct if you just didn't introspect on it at all. Like you just said, yep, that's it, and like I'm going to just assume the worst about everyone, and and you get insight into his backstory, especially in the second book. You get into that a lot. So
okay. So how much do you usually like interact with your readers?
All the time. I get emails from them. A lot of, I'm at my age, Facebook is the social media that I'm most comfortable with, but I am on like Twitter. I have an Instagram, but I don't know what good an Instagram really is for an author. Because it's like, here's a picture. It has nothing to do with writing, but here's a picture. Anyway, so I'm mostly on Facebook. So if people wanted to find me, that's where they would go. But I like emails though, because then I can, if someone wants a long reply about something, that's email is the better way to go. So.
Do you also have an emailing list that you like regularly write newsletters or?
I'm bad about using my newsletter and my blog. I have them and I need to be better about it. Right now, though, what happens to me is I'm either really focused on marketing or I'm really focused on writing. They kind of switch off. So I'm working on a book right now that I really want to get done. I don't have a title yet. I have well, the working title might be Bard Hard, which is just a bard and a Die Hard reference. But I kind of like the idea that if I had sequels, I could have it be called Bard Harder, like the sequels of I don't know if you know Die Hard very well, but like there's Die Hard, Die Harder, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Like it would be Bard Hard, Bard Harder, and Bard Hard with a Vengeance. But I just love the idea of that as a title, even though it's so corny. But anyway, that's the series I'm working on. So like when I get really focused on a book, you get less and less newsletter and less blog. So that's how that works. But yes, I do have a newsletter, and you can sign up for it on my website, which is elleryhodges.com, with no periods in the address.
Okay, so I guess everybody who's waiting eagerly to express their admiration about your work can contact you and find you on Facebook. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And our book club will be towards the end of September, and you're welcome to sneak in and answer the questions the readers might have for you, or just see what we think, and maybe we find some philosophical meanings behind your work that you've never intended to have. So I hope you'll enjoy it as much
always
as
fun.
we do.
I'd love to, man.
Okay, thank you, and have a good day.
Bye-bye.